God's will for me is perfect happiness. This idea of sin is something that's tossed around a lot with course students, especially when you're new in this, trying to figure out what on earth are they talking about. How there is no sin, it has no consequence. What are you talking about? It has no consequence. I mean, because it's obvious that, say, some actions like killing your neighbor has some consequence, right? One, he's dead. Two, you're going to prison or gonna be dead yourself, right? Seems like pretty obvious consequences, right? How does this have to do with God's will for me is perfect happiness? This book is obviously stupid, right? This is obviously stupid. I gotta get, or it's talking about something different. It might be talking about something you don't quite understand, or you're applying what it's talking about to something that it's not meant to be applied to. Oh, that's interesting. That might be. You have to think outside of the box. That's a crazy idea. What is that? You have to think outside of the box? That's amazing. What? I'm not going to think outside of my box. So, a couple things. Well, one, sin isn't what we think it is. In the idea, the definition is wrong. And two, this is talking about the alternate reality in which God's will for you has nothing to do with, say, the structure of separation, the structure of your bodies being individual, separate people. Okay? So, the idea of sin is not in the sense of actions that, like, killing someone or adultery or stealing. While these things are good, noble, beautiful rules to maintain the structure of a society and keeping together and working well with each other and not killing off everybody because that, but that's society. Yes, that makes sense. Consequences, rules with actions make sense for society. What it doesn't make sense with is the fact that what you actually are and what your reality actually is. Now, the whole structure of society and the rules and those things and ideas to keep it contained and surviving are something that you've made by, say, under only God's laws. No other laws but God's, right? You made them under that, okay? You made them by that. So you also made it in the whole just linear comprehension of physical reality. I mean, anybody can make up rules. You don't have to understand much about anything to make up a rule, right? My brother was making up rules to games that, of course, it always leaned to him, and he would make up rules where he was winning regardless, and then if you use that rule and we're winning from that, of course, the rules have to change because you're winning. So he has to change the rules. You get the idea. It's a confusing whole scenario, and with chaos and that idea is that we get into this really distorting understanding of what's occurring. So I'm not condoning nor condemning any sort of activity at all, ever, okay? So I would, in any sort of sense of maintaining a community and maintaining a society, yes. But as far as I'm not going to tell you that it's okay to do anything, this is really an inside job, okay? That we're bringing this back to that being this inside job, that this is inside my noggin, okay? And so when you actually recognize what it is that God intended for you to experience, intended for this world, for your experience to be, it doesn't involve death at all. It never involved death. You developed a law that you call death. So it's actually a knowledge of good and evil And so you have life, and now you need a life is knowledge. Oh, I understand I have life. Understanding is knowledge, right? I understand I have life. Oh, now I have to understand that there's also death. Okay, so I have to understand that there's an opposite to death, even though I don't understand death, right? Because really there's just life. There's actually just life, and death is not actually here. Like, death is not actually here. You just kind of see other people stop moving, right? So regardless if it's actually here or not, what I'm referring to is that before the knowledge of good and evil, the actuality of what this dream was intended to be was just like in a dream where there's no rules, no laws, physically no laws, but the laws of God, in which was the experience of your intended happiness. So it gets a little confusing, but in the sense of recognizing that we adhere in our little box to all of these laws, not just of society, but of physical structured laws, physicality in our minds. That the whole reason even the faith of a mustard seed can move mountains, right? In that idea, and that what that's all about is that it's not really about the mustard seed. It's not really about the faith. It's about the recognition that moving mountains, even in just the smallest, a grain of sand, we can say a grain of sand of faith can move mountains. It's like the definition of what faith is. Everybody thinks they have faith. People think they have faith all over the place. Everyone's faithful, but no one's moving mountains. No one literally is physically moving mountains. And yet everybody has faith. Everybody has faith. Oh, they probably have faith. Some people might have faith of watermelons, but they're not moving mountains. Right? So how do we prove that they have faith? It's the ball game here is not about the faith. Okay? It's about recognizing that those who actually realize who they are and believe in the fact of who they are, not just something they don't see, not something they don't experience, but firsthand knowing who and what, say, God is. Of course, moving mountains is actually kind of a small thing. Everything is possible. Anything, and absolutely is possible. Yeah, mountains are just the concept, the idea of that is like, whoa, that seems huge, right? We seem, of course, that is impossible to our eyes here, to what our ideas of the physical world is. It's outside of the laws that we adhere to in our minds. Okay? So it's interesting because this idea that you're battling with what sin is, you're like, oh man, does this mean I can go rape and pillage and murder and kill and do everything I want? Anything? It's like, why do you only want to do those things? Why are those the things you only want to do? It's like, there's a lot of other things you could do when you realize there's no consequence. And you can actually benefit everything as well, you know. You can benefit the world with no consequences. Okay? So often that we think that there's consequences in the good fashion. You know, I have to sacrifice to get to what I want to get to, or to save the world, or whatever. And we always are obsessed with this sacrifice. And that there's problems or difficulty or struggle to get to that place. And it doesn't matter so much about if it's negative or positive. It's like sin, in the sense of what this really is the fact that you believe you're separate from the world. The consequence is the sin. You're feeling like you're separate from the world, and that's the experience of the pain in which you are every day. You're feeling the consequence right now. So if there is no separation, no sin, then there is no consequence, no pain, right? You're actually in the consequence right now, not so much as if it's, we get mixed up. We're like, well, we have to make something else sin so that we don't recognize this as sin. We have to make actions, doing things into sin so that this thinking is not sin. And we can't really, of course, see straight We can't remember who we are. That's the sin. Forgetting who you are. As I do say in many different ways about what sin is in several different factions and functions, but essentially sin is the idea that you could be separate from the universe and separate from God. So as much as the Course gets black and white all the time, it's always pretty much will say that yes, sin is impossible and separation is impossible, and yet you're sitting here doing it. You're being in the impossible. So it's not impossible. It's possible. But it's just like telling my boys, no, you can't do that, and guess what they're going to do? Right? It's like, no, separation's impossible. Well, I'll prove to you. I'll prove to you that it's possible. I'll show you that it's possible. It's like I'll get into pain and suffering just to prove to you, God, that it is possible. It's interesting.